What would you say is the most important part about writing an essay?
I think the most important part would be the creative process that comes before the actual writing. So the research, because we all know I love research. That's probably the most important part, is the research and the want to like actually research, but the creative process as well, just because in addition to the research, you have to also be able to organize your information. And that's really difficult sometimes, especially when you have a word limit. Word limits are my worst enemy, because I typically go way past that because I want to talk about everything. I guess that would be probably the most important thing. But then there's also grammar and structure. So grammar's very important. I cannot tell you, when I worked with Mr. Glacier in the AP class, how many times I had to correct students for their grammar. It was ridiculous. Like, you're in an AP English class and somehow you cannot figure out the difference between all of the theirs. Stop it.
2 and 2.
Yes. Oh, yeah. That was my favorite. Or where the punctuation goes when you're quoting something. That drove me crazy. All of those things are really, really important. And the structure as well. You want to make sure you're not super repetitive. That was something that, actually, even with the word length thing, my word length always being long, I was never repetitive. I was always introducing new information, which made it so difficult when I wanted to go through and make my essays shorter so that I could meet the word restriction. I never could, because I never repeated anything. All of the information that I presented was new information. So it took a really long time to figure out what to cut out, because I thought everything was vital and necessary and important information. Being wordy too, that can be really bad. I tried not to be wordy, but there's some words that it sounds like such a nice word. I liked using
thesauruses.
Yes, I love thesauruses. I really liked right-clicking a word and being like, wow, you can use this word instead? Great, that sounds awesome. And even I may not have known the meaning of the word before, but then I would look it up and see what it would be like in a sentence and use it in context. And I really liked. I think I learned a lot using a thesaurus, probably more than most people, maybe. I don't know if anybody else used a thesaurus as religiously as I did during essay writing.
So how do you structure your papers? How do you set them up? And how do you work on them? In what order do you usually do it?
Usually, and this is something they taught me like in middle school, and I still do it to this day. I think it's really important, and a lot of people don't, for structuring their essays. I will write down a map of how I would like my essay to go. So what the idea, my thesis, brainstorming, but I forget the word for it. It's like bubbles when they connect to each other, where I would put ideas.
Graphic organized.
Yeah, that. So I would use those to help organize my thoughts, and then as I was writing, it was so much easier to see where I was supposed to be going next, what information should be presented at which point. I typically, once that's all done and that's all settled and everything's good, I write a thesis statement based off of my little brainstorming sheet. That's the first thing that I write in an essay, is my thesis statement. I know a lot of people write the body and then write a thesis statement, but I want to know what I'm supposed to be writing about. Most of the time, though, I will go back and edit my thesis statement, just because sometimes the idea that I want to present changes. Or I'll be writing and I'll be like, well, maybe this doesn't sound great. Let me just figure out a way to, obviously it doesn't change the overall theme of the essay, but sometimes the thesis statement will change just to adapt to what I'm writing. So, and it depends how long the essay is too. I hate 5-paragraph essays. I think they're ridiculous. It's like, are we in middle school? But just because there's not just 3 ideas that I want to present most of the time in an essay or an argument or any of those kinds of things, most of the time I want to present way more than that, and sometimes even less than that. Sometimes you can get your point across with two body paragraphs, those kinds of things, but they're usually really long in my case. So I'll write the thesis statement, I'll brainstorm, I'll write the thesis statement, then I'll write the body of my essay. My conclusion Usually I do repeat the thesis statement, but in a different way where it's kind of closing it out.
Like rewording it.
Right. I'll reword it. It most of the time comes out really, really good. There's times where I'm like, I'm writing my conclusion statement and I'm like, oh my gosh, why can't I get this to sound right? And then I'll have to reread my entire essay from start to finish, reread my thesis, go through my brainstorming, and then write a conclusion, because that to me, when I was grading papers, I remember that's the last thing that leaves an impression on you. You read the whole thing and you're like, well, there were some great ideas, but the conclusion closes everything out. That's very, very important. That's the thing that basically proves that you proved your point. So when you get to the very end, you know, that's what most professors, I think, are looking for. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was great to interview for a second time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.